The first day I drove up the long gravel road to my family's 150-year-old ranch, I had no idea how quickly things would spiral into chaos. The air smelled like fresh pine, the wooden fences still stood proud even after generations, and the old barn leaned just enough to remind me of its history. For me, this wasn't just a house or some property, it was a legacy. My great-grandfather had built it from nothing, my father had kept it alive through droughts and storms, and now it was my turn to restore it, to make it home again. I was still unloading boxes from my truck when the sound of engines echoed up the drive. At first, I thought it might be neighbors coming by to welcome me, maybe even lend a hand. But when I saw 3 shiny black SUVs crawling toward me like a procession, my gut told me otherwise. Out stepped a group of people dressed far too neatly for country life. They weren't carrying pies or handshakes. They carried clipboards, smug smiles, and the kind of self-importance you can smell from a mile away. At the front was a woman in oversized sunglasses and heels that didn't belong anywhere near gravel. She strutted up like she owned the place, didn't even bother saying hello, and barked out the first words that would kick off a war. This property is under our HOA's jurisdiction, and you'll need to comply with our regulations immediately. I almost laughed in her face. My ranch? Under their control? Their little subdivision was at least a mile down the road, full of cookie-cutter houses stacked so close together you could smell your neighbor's dinner. My ranch had been here long before that neighborhood existed, long before their HOA even formed. Still, she wasn't joking. She started rattling off a list of demands like she was reading from a script. You'll need to submit a request before making any modifications. Those horses out front will need to be relocated. Our rules don't allow livestock in visible areas. That old barn must either be painted to match community standards or torn down. And that windmill? It's a hazard. It has to come down immediately. I put the box I was carrying down and stared at her, wondering if she was actually serious. She was. Her little army of board members stood behind her nodding along, eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of control. I finally spoke up. Lady, this ranch is older than your entire neighborhood. My family built this land up long before your HOA even existed. You don't get to walk onto my property and tell me how to live. Her smirk didn't falter. In fact, it grew sharper. Actually, sir, you'll find that our community charter is expanding. Your ranch falls within the boundaries we're annexing this year. That means you're one of us now. Either you fall in line, or we'll have no choice but to escalate. Her voice carried the kind of arrogance only people drunk on fake authority can muster. I wasn't about to back down. Escalate? I asked. What exactly do you think you're going to do? That's when she pulled out her phone, flipped her hair, and without hesitation dialed 911. Yes, she said loudly enough for me to hear, we have a trespasser refusing to vacate a property under our management. She glanced at me with a wicked grin, like she'd already won. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, standing on land passed down through my bloodline, with the deed still safe in my bag, and this woman was calling the cops on me like I was some squatter. Her crew crossed their arms, satisfied, whispering to each other as if this was business as usual. My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. I knew the truth, and soon enough, so would everyone else. Minutes stretched as I leaned against my porch rail, watching them hover in my driveway like vultures. I could feel my heart pounding, not with fear, but with the kind of anger that builds when someone tries to strip away what's yours. The land beneath my boots was more than dirt and grass, it was history, sweat, and sacrifice. And no HOA with its flimsy rules and power-hungry president was going to take that from me. The woman, sensing my calm, tried another angle. If you cooperate, we might be lenient with the transition. Perhaps waive your initial violation fines. She paused, savoring the words. But if you continue resisting, we'll bury you in penalties so deep you'll wish you'd never moved in. I couldn't help but chuckle, shaking my head. Lady, you have no idea who you're dealing with. You can't find me. You can't control me. And you sure as hell can't take this ranch. But she didn't listen. She just stood there, sunglasses hiding her eyes, phone pressed to her ear as she repeated her lies to the dispatcher. Then, in the distance, I heard it, the low rumble of a siren cutting through the quiet evening air. Red and blue lights flickered against the trees, growing brighter by the second. The HOA crew stood straighter, smug smiles returning, already celebrating their victory. They thought the cops would drag me out by my collar and toss me off my own land. They thought they'd humiliate me in front of the community before I even had the chance to settle in. I didn't move. I didn't run. I just stood my ground on the porch, arms crossed, deed in hand, waiting for the cruiser to pull up. Because I knew one thing they didn't. I knew the law was on my side. And when the deputy stepped out of that car, it wouldn't be me answering questions. It would be them. By the time the sheriff's cruiser rolled to a stop at the end of the driveway, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky orange and gold. The timing felt almost cinematic, like fate itself had set the stage for what was about to unfold. I tightened my grip on the deed, ready to show it, ready to put these people in their place once and for all. They had called the cops on me, thinking they could scare me off. But what they didn't realize was that this was my land, my ranch, my legacy. And this was just the beginning of a fight they would regret ever starting. The sheriff's cruiser rolled up slowly, gravel crunching under the tires, lights still flashing against the old barn and fence posts. My heart was steady, but I could see the HOA crew almost buzzing with excitement, like children about to watch their enemy get scolded. The president, still hiding behind her sunglasses, stepped forward before the deputy even had both boots on the ground. She pointed straight at me and said with confidence, "That's him, officer. That's the trespasser. He refuses to leave this property, which is under our HOA's control. We've already explained to him that he's in violation of multiple regulations." Her voice dripped with fake concern, like she was doing the world a favor by protecting the community. The deputy gave me a long look, then slowly turned his gaze back to her. He didn't rush, didn't panic, just calmly asked, "Ma'am, can you explain exactly what violation you're claiming here?" She smiled like a cat about to pounce. "Of course. Livestock in view, unapproved structures, unsafe windmill, non-compliant fencing, failure to submit residency application, and refusal to cooperate with HOA authority. That's at least 6 immediate violations." The way she listed them out, you'd think she had been practicing. I let her finish, then stepped forward with the deed in my hand. "Deputy, this is my land. It's been my family's land for a century and a half. Here's the paperwork, signed, notarized, and recorded at the county office. This property has never been and will never be part of their HOA. They're trying to bully me out of my home." I handed him the thick folder, and he flipped through the pages, shining his flashlight on the documents as the sun dipped lower. His eyes narrowed as he read the original date, the transfer of ownership over generations, and the fact that my property lines didn't overlap their neighborhood boundaries at all. Meanwhile, the HOA crew began whispering nervously, but the president stayed defiant. "That's forged. It has to be. There's no way this land isn't included. Everyone in this valley has to comply. It's the law." The deputy shut the folder, looked her dead in the eye, and said calmly, "Ma'am, this deed is authentic. The county records confirm it. This ranch is not part of your HOA jurisdiction. You have no legal authority here." The smug smiles vanished instantly. The other board members shuffled uncomfortably, suddenly aware they were standing on ground they had no claim to. But the president wasn't finished. She threw her hands in the air dramatically and snapped, "Fine. If it's not official yet, it will be. The annexation is already in progress. This man thinks he's above the rules, but once the paperwork is finalized, he'll have to answer to us. I couldn't resist grinning. Funny thing about that paperwork, I said. You don't know what's happening behind the scenes, do you? The deputy raised an eyebrow at me, curious. I leaned against the porch post and continued, I've been in touch with the county for months. Your HOA charter, the one that gives you all this supposed power, was expiring. The county was looking for someone responsible to manage the community going forward. Guess who they appointed? The deputy's eyes widened slightly, realizing where I was going with this. The HOA president's smirk faltered, but she forced a laugh. You expect us to believe they handed control of an HOA to some rancher who just moved in? Ridiculous. That's when I reached into my folder again and pulled out a crisp, newly stamped document. The county seal glimmered faintly in the deputy's flashlight. Not only am I the rightful owner of this ranch, I said, handing the paper over, but as of last week, I'm also the newly appointed head of the HOA. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. The deputy's lips curled into the smallest grin as he read the appointment letter. He handed it back to me with a nod. Looks official to me. The HOA crew looked like their world had just collapsed. One of the board members muttered something about not being told, while another backed away toward his SUV. But the president? She refused to accept it. This is fraud. You're making this up. We've run this HOA for 20 years, no one can just take it away from us. Her voice cracked, betraying the panic she tried so hard to hide. I took a step closer, my boots crunching on the gravel, and spoke low but firm. You called the cops on me for living on my own land. You tried to threaten me with fake violations. You lied to law enforcement about me being a trespasser. And now you're standing here denying the truth because you can't handle the fact that your reign is over. I let the words sink in before adding, the law doesn't bend to your ego. You're finished. The deputy cleared his throat, clearly enjoying watching her squirm. Ma'am, unless you want to be cited for filing a false police report and trespassing on private property, I suggest you and your board leave immediately. Her face turned red, her fists clenched, but she had no choice. She spun on her heels, barking at her crew to follow. They climbed back into their SUVs, slamming the doors harder than necessary, and peeled down the driveway in a storm of dust. The president rolled her window down as they left and shouted, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." But her voice was drowned out by the sound of her own tires skidding against the gravel. As the dust settled, the deputy chuckled. Well, I don't think I've ever seen a group of people get put in their place that fast. You handled that better than most. He tipped his hat and added, if they give you any more trouble, don't hesitate to call. Something tells me you won't have much to worry about, though, not with the new title you've got. After he left, I stood on the porch, the night settling in around me. The barn creaked softly in the breeze, the horses shifted in the paddock, and the stars began to prick the sky. It should have been a peaceful first evening at the ranch, but my mind was racing. The battle with the HOA wasn't finished. People like that president don't give up power quietly. She would fight, she would scheme, she would try to rally the old guard. But now the tables had turned, and I had the law, the land, and the community on my side. I poured myself a glass of water from the jug I'd brought along, sat down on the porch steps, and let the events replay in my head. They thought they could intimidate me, thought they could scare me out before I even unpacked a box. They underestimated the history of this land, the strength of the deed, and the fact that I wasn't just some newcomer. They underestimated the fact that I was their new boss. The game had only just begun, and if they wanted a war, they were about to learn what it felt like to fight someone who wasn't playing by their rules anymore. This wasn't just about a ranch. It was about freedom, respect, and justice. And I wasn't about to lose any of it. The news spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. By the time the weekend rolled around, everyone in the community had heard the story. The HOA president tried to call the cops on the new ranch owner, only to find out he wasn't just a landowner, he was now the new HOA boss. Some people whispered about it in disbelief, others laughed like it was the best thing they'd ever heard, and a few even came by the ranch to shake my hand. One older man, Mr. Jenkins, who had lived in the subdivision for over 30 years, showed up at my fence with tears in his eyes. "Son," he said, gripping the wood rail with shaking hands, "you don't know how long we've been waiting for someone to stand up to them. They fined me last year for having my granddaughter's pink bicycle parked in the driveway. Said it wasn't aesthetic. You're the first person in decades to knock them off their throne." His words hit me harder than I expected. I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was bigger. By Monday morning, the former HOA board tried to hold an emergency meeting in the clubhouse, claiming they still had authority. I showed up with my paperwork, calm and collected, while they were red-faced and sputtering. The president slammed her gavel down on the table and shouted, "Order. This man is a fraud. He has no legitimate claim here." I walked up slowly, handed copies of my county appointment to every homeowner present, and said, "You don't have to take my word for it. Read it for yourselves. The county reassigned management, and as the largest landowner in the area with historic ties, I was chosen. Your former charter expired. Your authority is gone." The room buzzed with murmurs as neighbors read the documents. Some gasped, others smiled. A single mother in the back stood up and said, "So, does this mean those ridiculous fines for flower beds are gone?" I nodded. Gone. Effective immediately. The room erupted in applause. You could see the weight lifting off people's shoulders. Years of oppression from a board obsessed with control were finally crumbling before their eyes. The president pounded the gavel again, but her voice was drowned out by cheers. She screamed, "This is illegal. You can't just erase everything we've built." I turned to her calmly and said, "I'm not erasing the community. I'm erasing the tyranny. There's a difference." That week, I began making changes. The first thing I did was abolish the petty, invasive rules, the ones about paint colors, lawn lengths, swing set measurements, and holiday decorations. I drafted a new charter focused on safety and fairness, not micromanagement. If someone wanted to paint their shutters blue, they could. If kids wanted to chalk the sidewalks, they could. If families wanted to keep gardens, play music, or park their trucks in their own driveways, no one was going to fine them anymore. I wasn't there to control people. I was there to protect their right to live freely. The response from the community was overwhelming. Neighbors I had never met before stopped me in the grocery store just to say thank you. A retired veteran came by the ranch with a homemade pie, telling me he'd once been fined for flying his American flag too high on the pole. He shook my hand so firmly I thought my bones might crack. Families started inviting me to barbecues, and kids waved when they saw me drive by. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive again. But not everyone was happy. The former HOA president wasn't about to go down without a fight. She began sending out letters, handwritten threats, claiming she was organizing a lawsuit against me. She even started a whisper campaign, telling anyone who would listen that I was dangerous and unfit to lead. But the more she tried to smear me, the more people rallied behind me. They'd seen her corruption firsthand. They'd lived under her rule. Her words held no weight anymore. Then she tried a different tactic. One evening, I noticed a small crowd gathering at the edge of my property. Curious, I walked over and found the president standing on the road with a megaphone, declaring to anyone passing by that my ownership was invalid and that I had stolen the HOA. She had even dragged along a few loyal board members who parroted her claims. I let her rant for a few minutes before stepping up onto the fence rail, raising my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Folks, you know the truth. You've seen the documents, you've spoken to the county. This woman is clinging to power she no longer has. She's the one who stole from you, your money, your peace of mind, your freedom. All I've done is give it back. The crowd erupted with cheers, drowning her out completely. Embarrassed and red-faced, she stormed off, her little posse trailing behind her. That was the last time she ever tried a public stunt. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew people like her didn't just quit. I doubled down, attending county meetings, securing legal backing, and making sure every decision I made was transparent. I invited community members to be part of the process, forming a volunteer committee where voices actually mattered. For once, the HOA wasn't a dictatorship, it was a democracy. The changes were immediate. Families began fixing up their homes, not out of fear of fines, but out of pride. People helped each other again, neighbors lending tools, kids selling lemonade, folks gathering for block parties without worrying about permit violations. The weight of tyranny had lifted, and in its place was joy. But behind all the laughter and newfound freedom, I stayed cautious. The former president lurked like a storm cloud at the edge of everything. Rumors swirled that she was talking to lawyers, trying to find a loophole to claw her way back. I knew she wasn't finished. Every time I looked out at the road, I half expected to see her SUVs again, headlights glaring through the dusk. One night, as I sat on my porch watching the stars and listening to the crickets, I thought about how quickly everything had changed. I'd come here just wanting to live on my family's ranch, restore what had been lost, and build a life. Instead, I'd stumbled straight into a war. But somehow, that war had turned me into a leader. A reluctant one, maybe, but a leader nonetheless. And as I watched the windmill turning slowly in the moonlight, still standing tall despite all their demands to tear it down, I realized something: this fight wasn't just about me. It was about every homeowner who'd ever been bullied, fined, or silenced by people drunk on power. The ranch was my inheritance, but this new role, this fight, it was something bigger. The community needed someone willing to stand up. And as much as the HOA president hated it, that someone was me. She had started this battle by calling the cops on me. But now, I was the one calling the shots. And deep down, I knew she wouldn't stop until she tried one last desperate move to take back control. The question was, how far would she go? Weeks that followed were some of the most surreal of my life. What had started as a simple move into my family's ranch had turned into a full-scale showdown with the most power-hungry HOA president anyone had ever seen. But with each passing day, her grip on the neighborhood grew weaker, and the community grew stronger. Families who had been hiding behind drawn curtains started opening up again. I saw kids riding bikes down the streets without parents nervously peeking through blinds, worried about some clipboard-wielding enforcer writing them up. People started decorating their houses the way they wanted, bright shutters, colorful flower beds, flags flying freely. For once, it felt like a neighborhood, not a prison yard run by self-appointed guards. And every time I walked through town or drove by in my truck, people would stop me, shake my hand, and say, "Thank you for standing up to them." But while the people celebrated, the former HOA president plotted. She wasn't built to accept defeat. She had spent years building a kingdom of fear and control, and watching it collapse under her feet ate her alive. At first, it was subtle, letters slipped into mailboxes, unsigned but dripping with threats. Then came the late-night phone calls to neighbors, whispering rumors about me, saying I was a fraud, claiming I only wanted to destroy the community for profit. Nobody bought it, though. The more she spread lies, the more people came to me to share them, shaking their heads at her desperation. Then she tried lawyers. I got a letter one morning, delivered to the ranch in a big, official-looking envelope. She was suing me personally, claiming my appointment as HOA head was invalid, accusing me of fraud and even trespassing on my own property. For a brief second, my stomach dropped. Lawsuits are messy, expensive, and designed to wear people down. But when I brought the letter to the county office, they laughed it off. "She has no case," the clerk told me. "We've dealt with her antics before. You're legally appointed, and your ownership is unquestionable. She's just wasting money." Relief washed over me, but I also knew this meant she was becoming reckless. And reckless people are dangerous. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, I heard shouting near the edge of my property. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the dirt path. There she was, standing on the road with two of her loyal board members, pointing at my fence and yelling, "This doesn't belong to you. You can't keep us out." I stayed calm, shining the light just enough for them to see me coming. "It's over," I told her firmly. "The more you fight this, the worse you make it for yourself. The community doesn't want you anymore. They want freedom." Her face twisted with rage, and she screamed, "I built this HOA. I gave this neighborhood order. Without me, it will fall apart." That was the moment I finally saw her for what she really was, not a leader, not a protector, but a dictator terrified of losing power. She wasn't fighting for the community. She was fighting for herself. I gave her one last chance. "You can stay here like everyone else. As a neighbor. As an equal. No more fines, no more power trips. Or you can keep pushing and force me to take legal action against you. Your choice." For a moment, I thought she might actually listen. But then she spat on the dirt, turned on her heel, and stormed off into the night. After that night, her resistance began to crumble. The lawsuit she filed fizzled in court within days. Her loyal board members started resigning one by one, some even apologizing to the neighbors they'd harassed over the years. And slowly, the once feared HOA president became nothing more than a bitter homeowner, stripped of authority, ignored by the very people she once controlled. Meanwhile, the community thrived. We organized volunteer projects to clean up shared spaces, not because we were forced to, but because people actually wanted to. We held barbecues, block parties, and community meetings where everyone had a say. I turned the old HOA clubhouse into a community center, where kids could hang out after school and neighbors could gather for coffee or book clubs. The atmosphere transformed completely. What was once a place of fear had become a place of pride. I'll never forget the day Mrs. Alvarez, a sweet woman in her 70s, knocked on my door. She brought me a basket of cookies and said, "You don't know what this means to us." For years, I couldn't even plant sunflowers in my yard without them threatening me. Now I see my garden blooming, and I feel free again. "You gave us that." Her words reminded me why I fought so hard. This wasn't just about my ranch anymore. It was about giving people back their dignity. Of course, the former president didn't disappear entirely. Every now and then, I'd see her walking her dog, avoiding eye contact as neighbors she once fined now waved to me instead. She had become a shadow of her former self, powerless, bitter, and alone. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But then I remembered the countless families she bullied, the fines she stacked up against retirees, the threats she made against single mothers, the way she tried to throw me off land that had been in my family for generations. Sympathy wasn't something she had earned. One evening, as I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the windmill turn gently against the sunset, I realized the full weight of what had happened. They had tried to take everything from me the day I arrived. They called the cops, tried to brand me a trespasser, tried to bury me in rules and fines. But instead of losing my home, I had gained something far bigger. I had become a protector for an entire community. And the irony of it all still made me laugh sometimes. They called the cops on me, thinking they'd scare me off. Instead, I became their boss. Their worst nightmare had turned into the neighborhood's best outcome. The old ranch stood strong, the fences repaired, the barn freshly painted, the horses grazing peacefully in the pasture. Life had come full circle. The story didn't just end with me keeping my land. It ended with justice. The HOA that once ruled with fear was dismantled from within, replaced by something fair and honest. And as I looked across the fields that night, listening to the crickets and watching the stars blink awake, I knew one thing for certain: no one would ever take this ranch, or this community, away from me again. They tried to bury me with rules, with threats, with lies. But what they didn't realize was that the roots of this land ran deeper than any of their authority. This was my legacy, my home, and now, my community. And if they thought I was going anywhere, they were dead wrong. Because sometimes, the best way to beat the system isn't to fight from the outside. It's to take it over. To rewrite the rules. To give power back to the people who deserve it. That's exactly what I did. And standing on that porch, with the land my great-grandfather once walked beneath my boots, I couldn't help but smile. They had called the cops on me for moving into my own ranch. But in the end, I wasn't just the owner of the land. I was the new HOA boss. And this time, the community finally had a leader worth following.